Predator becomes prey in the Florida Everglades as hundreds of hunters descend on the Sunshine State to catch and kill as many Burmese pythons as possible.
Florida's wetlands have a secret predator, one that slithers silently, grows terrifyingly large, and leaves devastation in its wake. The state's ambitious anti-python project has been hunting these invasive snakes for years, but the latest footage reveals something nobody expected. Cameras capture more than just the sheer scale of the pythons. They reveal the shocking aftermath of their presence. Landscapes stripped bare, native wildlife vanished, and ecosystems forever altered. What started as a wildlife control effort is turning into a race against an unstoppable force of nature. Join us in this video as we dive into the chilling reality that the cameras caught. Number 7. The rise of the Robo rabbit. This is the moment when Florida's anti-python project took a turn nobody expected. After the live bait program wrapped up, engineers and biologists came together with one mission: create the perfect python decoy. They already understood exactly what these snakes hunted for: the warmth of a small mammal, the scent of soft fur, and even that tiny flicker of movement that gives prey away. With that blueprint in mind, they started building something straight out of science fiction.
But the Burmese python infestation in Florida is far from a work of fiction. Wildlife biologists are deploying a new weapon effort to eradicate this threat to the Everglades: robotic rabbits.
They called it the Robo rabbit, and it wasn't just clever, it was a full-on engineering marvel. Each decoy was built using rugged, weather-resistant materials and coated with synthetic fur that looked just real enough in the Florida marshlands. Inside, a heating pad gave off a constant warmth of about 99 degrees, nearly matching a real marsh rabbit's body temperature. Battery-powered scent emitters released a special chemical that mimicked rabbit musk, drifting across the swamps like the real thing. Some models were even more advanced, with tiny motors that twitched the ears and nose just enough to complete the illusion. These weren't toys. Each one cost almost $4,000 to build. And hidden deep inside was the real secret: a motion-triggered camera and a transmitter. Anytime something slithered close, the device woke up and pinged biologists who were sitting miles away, watching live feeds from the marshes. Small solar panels kept the whole system running for weeks at a time. The plan itself sounded simple: place 120 Robo rabbits inside protective pens in known python hotspots. The goal wasn't to harm the snakes, but to lure them into monitored zones where trained teams could swoop in and remove them from the ecosystem. No one knew if it would work, but the moment the first units were deployed, everything changed. The first 2 days were stunning. Alerts came in constantly. Cameras captured jaw-dropping footage of massive pythons, some stretching more than 15 feet, gliding toward the decoys. They flicked their tongues, testing the air, sensing heat and scent. Then they struck, coiling their bodies around what they thought was an easy meal. The teams rushed in, capturing snake after snake. It was working better than anyone imagined, until day 3. That's when the system pinged from a unit near a deep canal. The biologist assumed it was another python, but when the feed came up, the figure on the screen wasn't a snake at all. It was a 12-foot alligator, gliding through the water like a dark, living log. And it wasn't confused. It was attracted to the same signals: the heat of a struggling animal, the scent of musk, the twitch of fake movement. In one explosive burst of water, the gator lunged. It hit the pen with a force that shook the entire frame and crushed the $4,000 robot in a single bite. That's when everyone realized the problem. The decoys didn't just attract pythons, they attracted everything. And here's the part nobody ever mentions: Pythons and alligators are ancient rivals. They fight for territory, food, and dominance. By scattering hundreds of irresistible meals across their shared hunting grounds, humans had accidentally started something wild. The perfect bait didn't just lure predators, it sparked a predator war. Alligators quickly learned these robots were easy targets, even if they didn't taste great. They began seeking them out and destroying them. Pythons, sensing the much larger gators lurking around the traps, started avoiding the areas entirely. The whole project collapsed almost overnight. The expensive machines were getting crushed. The pythons weren't falling for the trick anymore, and the alligators seemed to be having way too much fun wrecking government equipment. But even as everything seemed to fall apart, the robots were hiding a secret, one nobody saw coming. So, before the creation of the perfect decoy to lure the snakes, what did they use to try to combat the snake problems? Let's find out. Number 6. The dogs who could smell the invisible. When Florida's bounty programs barely scratched the surface of the python invasion, wildlife managers realized they needed a new kind of hunter, one that didn't depend on luck, flashlights, or sharp eyesight. They needed a creature driven by instincts older than civilization itself. That's when they turned to humanity's oldest partner in survival, the dog. The Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission launched a bold experiment built around just 2 dogs, trained with the same intensity as elite detectives. Their mission was simple, but nearly impossible for a human: to track a python by scent alone. Their names were Truman and Eleanor. Truman was a black Labrador with a soft, friendly face, the kind you'd expect to see playing fetch in a suburban park. Eleanor, a Dutch shepherd with sharp, focused eyes, carried herself with precision and poise. For months, trainers taught them to detect one specific odor, the faint, musky trail a Burmese python leaves behind. Humans can't smell it at all, but it lingers in the grass, mud, and swamp water long after the snake has passed. A ghostly trail only a trained nose can follow. Once Truman and Eleanor hit the field, the results were almost immediate. Within just a few months, the pair helped catch several large pythons that had escaped human search teams for weeks. Their movements became famous among handlers. Truman's tail would go rigid. Eleanor would lower her head, circle slowly, then freeze, the universal signal that the prey was near. Seconds later, a flashlight beam would reveal the gleam of patterned scales shifting in the underbrush. These dogs were finding pythons in minutes where teams of experts had searched for hours. But success in the Everglades always comes with a price. The swamp is a brutal place to work. Summer temperatures climb past 100 degrees Fahrenheit, and humidity feels like a heavy blanket. Truman and Eleanor had to wear cooling vests and special boots to keep the sawgrass from slicing their paws. And everywhere they went, danger lurked. Alligators hiding in the water, venomous cottonmouths coiled in the grass, and deep mud pits that could swallow a person whole. Yet the biggest challenge wasn't the heat or the predators. It was scale. The Everglades stretches across 1.5 million acres. Truman and Eleanor were incredible, but they were only 2 dogs. To truly cover the Everglades, Florida would need hundreds of dog teams, each requiring months of training, constant care, and expensive equipment. It was a breakthrough, but not a solution. Still, the dogs proved one undeniable truth: scent was the key.
The Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission recently began training 2 dogs to detect a python scent and alert handlers when they've come across a snake, and they just had their first success.
If Truman and Eleanor could track pythons through smell alone, what if scientists could flip the idea? What if, instead of hunters searching for snakes, the snakes were drawn to the hunters? That question pulled scientists down a path they weren't prepared for, one that blurred the line between innovation and desperation. They began with small, tightly controlled tests using live marsh rabbits, a python's natural prey. The rabbits were placed in strong protective pens that kept them physically safe, while their presence released the scents and sounds pythons instinctively home in on. The effect was immediate and unsettling. Terrified but unharmed, the rabbits became irresistible magnets. Within weeks, massive pythons began appearing near the enclosures, one after another, drawn in by the unmistakable scent of prey. The experiment proved the concept. Prey attraction worked. But the images told another story. Trembling rabbits surrounded by giant constrictors. Outrage erupted almost instantly. Animal welfare groups denounced the trials as cruel and inhumane. The backlash was so strong that funding was pulled, and the entire live bait program was shut down. Florida couldn't use live animals. The public wouldn't allow it. So what happened after the robotic project? Keep watching to find out. Number 5. The robot's secret payoff. By the time the robotic rabbit project collapsed, everyone involved was ready to walk away. The decoys had turned into expensive chew toys for alligators, and millions of dollars had literally been crushed in giant reptile jaws. The program seemed like a total disaster. But just as the team prepared to shut everything down, a young data analyst noticed something nobody else had bothered to look at. The robots weren't just lures. They were witnesses. Every Robo rabbit had been quietly gathering information from the moment it was deployed. Its motion sensors, thermal imaging, and tiny cameras didn't simply record attacks. They recorded everything that moved nearby. Pythons, alligators, birds, even shifts in the wind and water. Even the decoys that hadn't been attacked captured hours and hours of untouched data. Timestamps, temperature changes, predator paths, and direction of travel. Individually, the information looked useless. But when the analysts started cross-referencing all 120 units together, especially the ones that survived long enough to send complete logs, a shocking pattern began to emerge. The pieces fit together like puzzle fragments of a world nobody had ever seen before. Using the data, the team built a three-dimensional digital map of the Everglades predator activity. When the visualization loaded for the first time, the room fell silent. The pythons weren't wandering aimlessly through 1,000,000+ acres of swamp. They were following routes, hidden corridors in the water and sawgrass that acted like secret highways connecting their hunting zones. The alligators were using the same corridors, sometimes overlapping, sometimes avoiding each other with uncanny precision. It was a living, breathing network of predators, a system that had existed long before anyone thought to look for it. And that's when the story stepped straight into science fiction. The scientists took everything, every heat signature, every twitch, every failed strike, every crushed robot, and fed it all into a powerful learning AI. The goal was simple: find patterns humans couldn't possibly spot. As the system processed the data, the algorithms began making connections so deep and complex, they stunned the team. The AI didn't just locate where pythons were hiding. It started predicting where they would be and when. Why? Because it had learned the one thing nobody realized. The pythons were moving in exact, deliberate patterns designed to avoid their only true enemy, the alligator. The AI wasn't just mapping snake movements. It was decoding python psychology, their fears, their habits, and the secret rhythms of their lives. Without meaning to, the robot rabbits had cracked open the python invasion. They had mapped the species' entire hidden schedule, when they traveled, where they hunted, how they slipped between territories, and which routes they avoided at all costs. For the first time, scientists knew the python's deepest weakness. With this ghost map in hand, everything changed overnight. The hunters tossed out the old strategy of waiting at decoy sites. That approach belonged to the past. Instead, they used the AI's predictions to intercept snakes directly on their hidden highways, the places pythons traveled when they thought the world wasn't watching. The results were immediate and staggering. Hunters weren't finding lone snakes anymore. They were finding clusters, groups moving together along the same routes. And then the AI broke open the biggest secret of all. By analyzing the movements of large, mature females, it traced the snakes straight back to their most protected locations. It found the breeding grounds, deep in parts of the swamp no human had ever discovered. The teams uncovered massive nests filled with dozens of females and thousands upon thousands of eggs. The scale was almost unreal. In just 1 month of using the AI's guidance, hunters removed more invasive pythons than during the entire previous year of the bounty program. Every broken robot, every failed hunt, every crushed $4,000 decoy had all led to this breakthrough. The robotic rabbits hadn't just been bait. They had been the accidental key to unraveling the entire invasion. They didn't just change the fight, they changed the war. But what other way did Florida use to control their python problem? Keep watching to find out. Number 4. The invisible weapon. For years, Florida tried all the classic methods to rein in its exploding Burmese python population. They hired hunters, offered hefty bounties, set dozens of traps, and even strapped high-tech trackers onto captured snakes to monitor their movements. But no matter what they did, the pythons kept spreading. By the early 2000s, one truth became painfully clear. Capturing them one by one would never make a dent. These snakes were masters of survival. They reproduced quickly, blended perfectly into the wetland terrain, and could vanish into the swamp like ghosts. That realization pushed a group of scientists toward a far more daring and controversial idea. Something that sounded simple on paper, but groundbreaking in practice. Instead of trying to fight the snakes from the outside, what if the battle happened inside their bodies? This led researchers straight into the world of viruses, bacteria, and microscopic parasites, the tiny, unseen organisms capable of weakening or unaliving an animal. The concept was bold. Find, modify, or engineer a biological agent that would target only Burmese pythons and spare every other creature sharing the Everglades. That was the non-negotiable rule. No alligators, no panthers, no native snakes, no birds. Nothing else could be affected. The stakes were enormous. Releasing a biological weapon is one of the riskiest moves in wildlife management. History carried brutal warnings. In Australia, a virus called myxomatosis was released to control invasive rabbits. It worked, but the rabbits suffered horribly. The virus evolved, and the ecosystem went through unpredictable chaos. No one wanted Florida to become the next ecological cautionary tale. Still, the python problem was turning into a crisis that many believed could reshape the Everglades forever.
They're the apex predators invading the Everglades. Burmese pythons, tens of thousands of them, terrorizing wildlife. They are seemingly everywhere.
A single female python can lay over 50 eggs at a time.
And we're gonna get the big mother load. So I think we got at least 40 eggs. She probably has over 50 eggs, but I don't count what you can't keep.
And their numbers were increasing faster than hunters and traps could keep up. Without something bold, something radical, Florida risked losing ground permanently. So researchers pushed forward, slowly and cautiously. One proposal focused on a virus-like agent that could spread only among Burmese pythons. The idea was to create something that weakened or unalived the snakes, while leaving every other animal completely untouched. Another team explored genetic approaches, using python's own DNA against it. Imagine a snake that could grow normally, live normally, and hunt normally, but could never reproduce. No babies, no nests, no next generation. The invasion would collapse quietly over time without filling the Everglades with dead snakes or disrupting other species. It sounded like something out of a futuristic thriller, and in many ways, it was. But when biologists looked at the raw numbers, the population growth, the ecological damage, the spread across 1.5 million acres, they saw no clear end in sight. Traditional tools weren't just failing, they were falling hopelessly behind. Still, every idea came with frightening risks. What if the biological weapon mutated? What if it jumped to another species? What if the cure became a new problem? Those questions slowed the research down at every step, filling labs and meetings with tension, debate, and uncertainty. This radical new direction showed just how desperate the battle had become. Florida's war on pythons was no longer just about traps, hunters, or technology. It was about to enter the invisible battlefield of biology, a place where one mistake could change everything. How did this new idea to combat the python problem fare? Stay tuned to find out. Number 3. The release that changed everything. The new idea instantly split the scientific community in two. Supporters said it was the state's last real chance. Critics warned that it was ecological Russian roulette. But the python invasion wasn't slowing down, and desperation has a way of silencing hesitation. In 2024, the decision was made. Florida approved the release. This wasn't a new bounty hunt or a larger trapping program. This time, the state turned to science and crossed a line that had never been crossed in the python war. The plan involved a biological agent, a modified organism engineered to sabotage python reproduction from the inside. Instead of hunting the snakes, researchers aimed to break their ability to breed. The agent was designed to target specific proteins in python blood. Over time, it would weaken the snakes, slow their movement, reduce their fertility, and make successful reproduction nearly impossible. If it worked, the python population wouldn't collapse overnight. It would quietly wither across generations. Officials approached the operation with extreme caution. They began testing the biological agent in remote sections of the Everglades, places far from human access. Dozens of pythons were tagged with trackers, their blood sampled and cataloged to monitor how the new agent spread and how their bodies reacted. Researchers wanted answers before the public demanded them. Public announcements were brief and vague. Authorities feared backlash if the experiment failed. They knew people would panic at the idea of a genetically modified organism loose in the wild. So the real details stayed buried inside lab reports and restricted meetings. Deep in the tangle of mangroves and sawgrass, the operation unfolded quietly. At first, the results were everything scientists hoped for. A handful of captured snakes showed strange new symptoms: sluggish movement, weakened muscles, and unusually low reproductive activity during the breeding season. For the first time, it looked like Florida might finally be gaining the upper hand. But hope quickly turned to worry. The Everglades is one of the most fragile ecosystems in North America, a living network where every species depends on another. If the modified agent mutated, spread too quickly, or jumped to another reptile species, it could threaten everything from alligators to endangered turtles. The same bold idea that promised victory also carried the risk of catastrophe. Even with these fears, Florida pushed forward. The python crisis had already gone too far. Every year that passed meant fewer birds, fewer mammals, and deeper ecological damage. Doing nothing was no longer an option. So the state took the gamble and, in the shadowed swamps of the Everglades, the experiment officially began. Only a handful of researchers knew the true scope of what had been released. For the first time in the decades-long war against Burmese pythons, Florida wasn't trying to hunt them from the outside. This time, the attack was coming from within. So was this new idea finally a success? Let's find out. Number 2. The counterattack begins. At first, the signs could be dismissed as rare anomalies, statistical noise in an experiment too new to judge. But week by week, the pattern sharpened. The modified agent was supposed to disrupt the python's internal systems slowly and quietly, breaking down proteins essential for strength and reproduction. And for a while, it did exactly that. 6 snakes were easier to track. Their once fluid movements turned jerky and uneven. Some drifted weakly through the water, barely able to lift their heads above the surface. Others coiled sluggishly, their muscles trembling, as they struggled to do what had always come so naturally. When these weakened snakes were captured, researchers felt they were finally seeing a crack in the armor. But cracks heal. And that's where the trouble began. Almost as if nature were offended by this intrusion, a segment of the python population started showing signs that shocked even the most seasoned biologists. Instead of deteriorating, some snakes displayed the opposite reaction. Tissue samples showed accelerated repair activity, cells working at a pace far beyond normal regeneration. The very damage caused by the biological weapon seemed to spark a counter-response, a kind of internal reinforcement. Their bodies weren't shutting down, they were adapting. Scientists examining these specimens felt a chill. The snake's immune systems weren't merely resisting the agent, they were restructuring around it, recalibrating the internal pathways the weapon was designed to disrupt. This wasn't just survival. It was evolution happening in real time. Field agents noticed behavioral shifts almost immediately. These resilient snakes did not act like typical Burmese pythons. Instead of gliding confidently through the marsh, they moved with an unusual awareness. They avoided open water. They struck sooner. They fled faster. And when cornered, they displayed bursts of aggression that were unlike anything documented before. The hunters felt it first, the sense that something in the swamp had changed. Veteran trackers spoke of snakes that seemed to anticipate human presence, withdrawing deeper into the mangroves before drones or boats came within range. Others described individuals who, though damaged internally, behaved with almost unnerving cunning. One even ambushed a research team's equipment, striking repeatedly at a motion sensor before disappearing into the reeds. It was behavior no one had predicted, as if the snakes were testing boundaries. This wasn't a simple defensive reaction anymore. It looked strategic. When lab reports confirmed early signs of genetic shifts, the tone of every briefing changed. Quiet confidence evaporated. Words like mutation, resistance, and accelerated adaptation began appearing in official documents, and with each new data point, the uncomfortable truth became harder to ignore. The Everglades wasn't just influencing the experiment, it was amplifying it. The environment itself seemed to play a role. The swamp, with its shifting temperatures and complex ecosystem, created the perfect breeding ground for rapid evolutionary pressure. Pythons with even slight resistance survived long enough to breed. Their offspring inherited those traits, and every new generation, each one produced startlingly fast, carried traces of the changes forward. Within months, a segment of the python population showed markers that no longer matched pre-release genetic baselines. This raised a terrifying possibility. The weapon wasn't simply failing to eliminate the snakes. It might be sculpting them. Officials, once eager to share progress, now argued behind closed doors. Should they halt the releases? Could they even contain what had already begun? And the most dreaded question of all, had Florida accidentally created a stronger, more adaptable predator than the one it was trying to destroy? Biologists who had spent careers warning about unintended ecological consequences now found themselves in the center of a nightmare scenario. Their attempt to weaken an invasive species may have triggered a biological escalation instead, one that they were unprepared to control. But how did this new idea to combat the python problem affect other animals in Florida? Keep watching to find out. Number 1. The swamp starts to break. Within months, the Everglades felt like it was holding its breath. What began as scattered reports turned into a steady stream of warnings, each one describing something that didn't belong in a healthy ecosystem. Biologists stationed deep in the wetlands were the first to connect the dots. They'd arrive at their field sites expecting to see the usual wildlife scurrying or rustling in the underbrush. Instead, they found small mammals stumbling out of the foliage as if they were disoriented or drugged. Raccoons wandered in circles. Opossums lay stretched across tree roots, barely reacting to human presence. Their eyes looked unfocused, their limbs weak. These weren't animals injured by predators or poisoned by contaminated food. Something inside them was failing, quietly and steadily. At first, researchers thought it might be a temporary illness, perhaps a seasonal virus or a reaction to rising temperatures. But then, the pattern spread. Each new day brought another set of reports, from deeper and deeper within the swamp. The symptoms remained the same: confusion, weakness, a strange lethargy that seemed to hollow out every creature it touched. Then the birds began falling. Species that had always thrived in the Everglades, herons, ibises, and egrets, suddenly struggled to maintain the graceful balance that defined them. Some birds collapsed mid-flight, crashing into the water with no warning. Others perched on low branches, trembling as if their bodies were shutting down. Rangers found several lying motionless along riverbanks, with no visible injuries. It was as if their strength had evaporated. The pattern continued to widen. Reptiles, animals long considered hardy survivors, started succumbing as well. Turtles were found barely moving on sunlit logs, their heads drooping. Small snakes slithered weakly through the grass, their tongues flicking slower than normal. Lizards that usually skittered across rocks with lightning speed now moved like they were wading through tar. The research teams could no longer deny it. The symptoms weren't isolated, and they weren't random. Something was moving through the ecosystem, slipping from one species to the next. And whatever it wasn't stopping.
Over 350 species of birds, 40 species of mammals, and a rich variety of reptiles and fish. And that includes almost 36 threatened or endangered species, including, of course, the Florida panther.
Even apex predators weren't insulated. A handful of alligators, the very kings of the swamp, were spotted with sunken sides and dull eyes. Their movements were sluggish, their usual power drained. One particularly large male, well known to local guides for years, was found barely responsive along the water's edge. If the alligators were faltering, then the integrity of the entire Everglades was at risk. They were the backbone of the ecosystem, the regulators of balance. Their decline meant something much deeper was unraveling. Word spread quietly, but consistently. Fishermen who spent their lives along the waterways noticed things before scientists even arrived. Spots once rich with fish went eerily still. The water, usually alive with motion, looked empty. The few fish they did catch were pale, slow, and unnervingly passive, as if something had drained the life from them without leaving a mark. Tour guides spoke of silence settling over stretches of swamp, where the chorus of insects and birds once filled the air. It wasn't the peaceful silence of dawn or dusk. It was heavy, wrong, a silence that seemed to swallow sound rather than rest beneath it. When these stories reached the research teams, they didn't dismiss them. They added them to the growing mosaic of data that painted a picture more troubling than anyone wanted to see. Testing began immediately. Scientists worked day and night, collecting water samples, analyzing leaf litter, and examining blood from sick animals. They were searching for anything: a chemical signature, bacterial presence, a viral marker that might explain the mass weakening. And then, buried deep in the tissue of one of the affected animals, they found what they dreaded: traces of the modified biological agent. It wasn't strong, it wasn't concentrated, but it was there. Something designed to target Burmese pythons had escaped its intended boundaries. It had begun to drift through the water, through the soil, through the interconnected web of predators and prey. It wasn't unaliving everything outright. It was weakening them, nibbling away at their strength, flowing into ecological pathways no one anticipated. The realization hit the research teams like a punch to the gut. The Everglades was never simple. It was a living machine made from thousands of moving parts, all intricately dependent on each other. A disruption in one species could cascade into dozens more. A disruption in many species could shake the entire system to its knees. Now, those cascading cracks were spreading. Florida had tried to eliminate one threat, but had created a bigger one. What are your thoughts on the anti-python project in Florida? Let us know in the comments section below. Thank you for watching this video. We hope you found it interesting. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Click the next video shown on your screen to catch up on your favorite celebrity stories. See you there.